I'm looking at the people in the back row. Are you good? Okay. I think I'm going to start with a short poem by Basho without talking about it, just because I read it this morning and just thought, wow, because he totally wrecked the form and made it new. Anyway, Basho, the Japanese poet, thank you, wrote, "Tired of cherry, tired of this whole world. I sit facing muddy sake and black rice. I'm going to talk about the craft of the invisible, and I actually wondered why I decided to do it. I'll tell you a little bit why before I start really, answering the questions and reading stuff and, behaving myself. The reason I kind of wonder about it is that the craft of the invisible, by its definition, is not really something that people should get PhDs in. It usually includes silence and intuition and trying to discover the ineffable. So, I'll just tell you a little story about myself, kind of pre-Jack Gilbert. When I was a child, I lived on 1,000 acres in West Marin with 27 horses, and I was alone a lot of the time. And I started reading, Emily Dickinson and Hopkins, Dunn, Lorca, etc. And I figured this is it. This is what, I guess I just was old enough to know that we were going to die. And I figured, this is it. This is what I want to give to the world. I'd read The Golden Echo and The Leaden Echo and The Golden Echo by Hopkins, and it said something like, give beauty back. And I thought, that's it. I can't think of anything more that I should do with my existence. So I figured out very young that there were 4 things that really mattered to me. One was nature, I was living in it. And one was the sacred, and I was trying to find it. And one was love, and I was, in the sense of serious romantic love, a bit young for that. And that's it. So it was nature, the sacred, love, and poetry. Those were the 4 things. So I was minding my own business, living my life, and I would walk every day, read every day, walk every day. And this is just a hint at what I mean by the invisible or the ineffable or magic, is that I would try to make contact with it by seeing a bay leaf or crouching down by a creek and looking at the minnows under the water and seeing the little water skeeters on top, or walking up to the top of the mountain and lying down on the loam under a big tree. All those kinds of things. So that's what I did. It was back and forth between reading poetry, walking, writing, and being alone. And that's what I did. And writing poetry as well, trying to learn to write poetry as a young girl. I'm sure there are many other people that have stories that are similar, this sort of discovery of what it is you're going to do with your life. Okay, that's the pretty story. The one that's put pressure on me is that in the last 10 years or so, about 5 important people in my life died, including Jack Gilbert, which was I'm still reeling from it, and I haven't sorted myself out in relation to that, not just love, but the kind of dialogue that we had with each other, and the not being alone part. And so my response to that was to become reclusive. So I'm in Manhattan, and I never go to readings, and I never give readings. And this is, first of all, there was the 10 years of taking care of Jack when he had dementia, and then there was the year and 2 months that I've been grieving over his death. So it's really a lot of time in which everything just came to a halt, and where all my attention was on Jack and then on grief. And so then this invitation came to me to come here. And I'm so glad I did it. Gosh, just think of the weather in Manhattan today. And check it out. I'm so glad I came here, but it was also a test, because I was beginning to ask myself, because there's all this silence and loneness and, kind of not totally knowing why I was behaving this way. Some of it was obvious because I was focused on Jack and his dementia, but some of it really wasn't, something else. And I think, anyway, I always am very slow, and I kind of don't try to think things. I kind of try to live them, and then it sort of becomes obvious about what's going on. I don't try to will myself very much. So I'm here, I'm happy, I love my students, I love where I'm living, and I'm going to just stop for a second. Oh, but I need to tell you this. I wondered before I came here, and this is like really shocking to me, given I've been involved with this passion, these 4 things for 55 years. I began to wonder if I did not believe it. Just didn't believe it. I wasn't in nature. I just wondered, what the hell about poetry? I've been there, done that. The sacred, love, well, I mean, gosh, all I've done is fail at love, except for the part where I didn't fail before the death or the breakup or something. But that was not a failure part, but it usually ended in death or I don't know, being left or something like that. But I just saying this to you as maybe you could call it a confession, but I'm as interested in what's going on personally as probably anybody in this room, because I want to know whether all this stuff really matters to me. So I did a lot of reading. I went back. Suddenly, pressure was put on me to get ready, to teach, to talk, as I am here now. And so here we go. I'll let you know how it comes out. I do want to read a page that I actually shared with my students this morning, but I want to do it again. When Jack had dementia, he was about 87 when he died. As anybody who knows anything about this, it's progressive, and the doctors will tell you. He was in the place where we could, if my friend Donald was with me, we could walk downstairs and walk to Tompkins Square and back, and then somehow he'd struggle to get up the stairs. He could talk, he could write. He could wake up and put his feet in his slippers and walk and sit at the kitchen table. He could still do stuff. It wasn't long after that where he could not write, and it wasn't long after that where he could not talk. But I was going to Princeton to teach, and I said to him, Jack, we had this big round oak table in the kitchen. I said, Jack, I think I want to say something about silence to my students. Would you mind just writing your thoughts about silence? And I shoved the paper across the table at him. True to form, he sat very upright. He put the paper in front of him, took the pen, looked down. He always does that. It's total focus. And he wrote this. I love it because it proves to me that Jack, even though he was losing his faculties, he was totally all there. And silence has something to do, I hope you already know this, with the ineffable. And this is what Jack wrote. Silence in poetry is the place where words come from, the space between the event and that event becoming a poem. Silence stands at the gate, at the opening of the field. Silence gives substance to poems the way death does in life. It is the invisible parts of the poetry. It is the invisibility of what is about to appear. Like a king of the play who is invisible, held back in the wings to build up the tension. The invisible all around us of this world without our seeing it until the poem speaks. The invisible and the space go hand in poetry. Like the night train pounding through the dark town in Texas as the dogs bark. Silence is emptiness just a little afterwards. Silence is what's invisible until the poem makes it visible. There is a huge silence built by implication, the silence that fills up our metaphors, pretending one thing and meaning the invisible other. It is the silence of Basho's haiku. It is what's invisible in the fragments of Emily Dickinson. Silence is the invisible kingdom that the poet makes us see. So, I had this 50-year relationship with Jack, and Jack was, a wizard. We had all names for him, like Zappo, which is the Greek spelling of Zorro, and the brain and the prince. And Jack was like this genius, Mensa guy that couldn't even, freaked by his own intelligence. And I was not. I was intuitive and, like Theodore Ruthke, who had a kind of way of entering animals and the animal brain and the mineral brain and all of that. I was more along those lines. Intuitive. I used to write all my poems I wrote in one move. Jack would think a poem for a whole week and then sit down and write it, walking the whole time, walking. And then just sit down and write it. There's something, I think, is it time I read to you? Let's see. Yeah. This is something I typed out about magic. Now, I just want to say something. Jack Spicer had a magic workshop, and Jack was in the group. I was not there. I was in the 50s, and I didn't meet him till the 60s. But he was in that magic workshop, and Jack Spicer said, we're not going to talk about it. What we're going to do instead is try to see if we can make it happen, write it. And then I think, maybe not that same moment, but soon after he gave everybody a tarot card and said, live with it for a week and come back with a poem. And, the next time it was like, be a man-eating, write a poem about a man-eating animal, things like that. So I wrote some stuff here about what I'm calling thinking about poetry and magic, but I also think in my mind the word ineffable, partly because magic gets tricky. Well, anyway, you'll see. So the first thing I wrote was a poem by D.H. Lawrence that I totally love, and it's called The White Horse. The youth walks up to the white horse to put its halter on, and the horse looks at him in silence. They are so silent, they are in another world. And then Sandra Gilbert says this, quote, draws its main strength from the symbolist desire to summarize the essence of a situation in a single untranslatable figure, unquote. I don't think it's about a situation. I suspect it is much more interested in communicating and blinding sudden revelation of something through that moment and those particulars. But there are many truths. Rilke says in the Duino Elegies, the animal's direct and pure perception of reality appears to be free of that nerve-brain knowledge of death which is distinctly human. We see only death. The free animal has its decease perpetually behind it and God in front. And when it moves into eternity like running springs. We've never, no, not for a single day, ... etc. That seems disturbingly close to analysis rather than poetry. I think it is far closer to both poetry and the essence when Lawrence writes in his essay, quote, "The animal lifts its head, sniffs and knows, only within the dark, passionate belly," unquote. Well, okay. I was just tempted to read a poem that I wrote. Lawrence writes in another essay, quote, "It knows at once in dark mindlessness." You know, I think I will read a poem I wrote called "The Copperhead," because it was my effort to get as close as I could from seeing the world from the point of view of an animal. In this case, it's a snake. The Copperhead. Almost blind, he takes the soft dying into the muscle hole of his haunting, the huge jaws eyeing, the raised head sliding back and forth, judging the exact place of his killing. He does not know his burden. He is not so smart. He does not know his feelings. He only knows his sliding and the changing of his hunger. He waits. He sleeps. He looks but does not know his seeing. He only knows the smallness of a moving. He does not see the fear of the trapping. He only sees the moving. He does not feel the caution. He does not question. He only feels the flexing and rearing of his wanting. He goes forward where he is eyeing and knows the fastness of his mouthing. He does not see the quickness collapsing. He does not see at all what he has done. He only feels the newness of his insides, the soft thing moving. He does not see the moving. He is busy coaxing and dreaming and feeling the softness moving in him. The inside of him feels like another world. He takes this soft thing and coaxes it away from his small knowing. He would turn in, follow, hunt it deep within the dark hall of his fading knowing, but he cannot. He knows that he cannot go deep within his body for the finding of the knowing. So he slows and lets go, and finds with his eyes a small moving that he knows. So that's, Jack also loved Lawrence. In fact, he came to California from Pittsburgh because he read the Lawrence selected with the intro by Kenneth Rexroth, which I think is pretty interesting, plus a Thoreau. And that was in the 50s. Anyway, carrying on here, I think the intent of the Lawrence poem and the magic are close to Bob Dylan's lyric, "All the tired horses in the sun, how you gonna get any riding done?" I would relate all of this to the mineral mind of, and then I mentioned 3 poems that I've written. I skipped that. Or maybe not, although, okay, Sun, Moon, Kelp is one, The Grub is another, and All Mature Sister. Okay, just as people speak of black magic and white magic, there seems to be a poetry of similar magic and a larger magic. Poems of the first kind want to give delight and hurt not, as Shakespeare said about something else. The second kind may not intend to give pleasure in the ordinary sense of the word. Poetry and jokes are very different, but they have something in common. At the center of each, there is an irrational jump from the givens to the consequence. Without that mysterious effect, the joke is just a pleasant anecdote, and the poem does not seem magical. With both jokes and poetry, there is an all-or-nothing quality. They either work or they don't exist at all, at least at the best. I'm going to read you some, but these are like almost antique, these poems. These are elephant jokes. I mean, this is like a 60s thing. Why do elephants have flat feet? From jumping out of trees. What is purple and has long white teeth and hangs in the jungle? The man-eating plum. What is red and white and goes put blam, put blam, put blam, blam, put, put? An outboard radish. So those are very old jokes. But, you know, there's a relationship between poetry and jokes. What is the difference between a fine joke and a fine poem? The joke gives pleasure without residue. The fine poem usually has an after effect, like that Basho poem I read at the beginning. In one of Coleridge's notebooks, he wrote, "What if a man should dream of paradise and wake to find a flower in his hand?" The American Heritage Dictionary gives the following definitions of magic. 1, the exercise of sleight of hand as for entertainment. 2, any mysterious or overpowering quality that lends enchantment. Both the smaller magic and the larger magic are magic and should be respected. Many things are said to be magic, which are not. If there's not magic somewhere in a poem, it is probably not a poem. Probably it is a short piece of prose with lots of ornaments. It can still be very nice. Nobody knows what magic is. There can be magic even though we can't explain it, and that, I think, should be underlined. Because I really think, Spicer's right, just, go do it, show me. We have some good guesses about what magic is. Magic usually changes one thing into something else, or it somehow makes an apparition or spirit exist for a while. There is a Lakota Sioux word that comes close to explaining what magic means. In their language, the sacred, the magical, spiritual, uncanny, and unnatural are all called Wakan. God is Wakan Tonka, or the greatest Wakanness. Doing the impossible is Wakan. True magic has the same curious combination of the unnatural, the sacred, and the impossible. I told my students today, I said, hey, try to write a poem that you can't write. I mean, it's absolutely impossible. Like, the face of God. I mean, it's just impossible to write a poem describing the face of God. So try to choose something that is absolutely impossible and see what happens. See what it forces you to. And I'll just say one more thing. If you take on large subjects, sometimes, at least for me, and this maybe goes to the ineffable or magic, is that my brain will start to sort of stutter. It's like, And because can't do the talking part anymore. And so what I do instead is I kind of go to a concrete image, go to metaphor, because the language is broken down. It really is helpful to try to do something very big. And so you get that kind of stutter and a force, kind of pressure on you and force. Okay, one of the clues to magic is found in the difference between fancy, fancifulness, and imagination. Fancy manipulates the outsides and appearance of things. Imagination deals with the transformation of the insides. True magic and important imagination deal with essences. It is the difference between similes and metaphors, between disco and Ray Charles. The way a child sees is often called magical. Well, I may skip this one because I don't completely believe it. I think I'm going to skip it. If the right word is put next to another word, it creates an overtone. This is one of the main things that gives all writing its character. If the right image is put next to another image, in a way it establishes a previously unknown connection between them. It often creates a metaphor. Ever since Aristotle, it has been said that metaphors are the source of the special magic in poetry. Using poetry to express oneself usually doesn't work unless some magic is included. The magic makes the reader experience what he is being told without some magic. It is like making a speech at the reader. The reader or the mother or the friend may be sympathetic, but that is different than experiencing. True poetry makes something happen beyond sympathy or agreement. Messages are not poems. The Japanese film director said that if the point was to state a message, he would have painted signs instead of making movies. The magic of poetry is involved with the essentially oblique, indirect, illogical, inefficient approach to communication. Poetry works through equivalence. The central principle of the no is that it does not imitate. Carefully describing every detail of a tree will not make that tree hover in the reader's mind. Magic cannot be created by carefully drawing diagrams on the floor, nor by reciting strange chants one has painfully memorized. It cannot be done mechanically. So, I think I'm going to end, I think my time's up, and I think I'm going to end by reading one poem. I think I'll read, okay. I'll read this one. Like I said, I lived in the country, and on the land of my father went up to the top of a mountain and went around, and then you could ride down into the public state park. And there was a place called Devil's Gulch, and I didn't know this until I was an adult, but Kenneth Rexroth used to live there in Devil's Gulch, and Louise and I, my twin sister, we used to ride over and down. And the cottage was no longer there, the cabin, but there were a couple of apple trees that had been, like never touched, and so they were like in horrible shape. And of course, they produced these tiny little apples that only deer could eat, but it was the last sign of where Rexroth had lived. So we used to go there. So this poem takes place, was it 54? In that place. Oh, there we go. This takes place in the valley just over the mountain, and it's called Death Looks Down. Death looks down on the salmon, a male and female in two pools, one above the other. The female turns back along the path of water to the male, does not touch him, and returns to the place she had been. I know what death will do. Their bodies already are sour and ragged. Blood has risen to the surface under the scales. One side of his jaw is unhinged. Death will pick them up, put them under his coat, against his skin, and belt them there. He will walk away up the path through the bay trees, through the dry grass of California to where the mountain begins, where a few deer, almost the color of the hills, will look up until he is under the trees again and the road ends and there is a gate. He will climb over that with his treasure. It will be dark by then, but for now he does nothing. He does not disturb the silence at all, nor the occasional sound of leaves, of ferns touching, of grass or stream. For now he looks down at the salmon, large and whole, motionless, days and nights in the cold water, lying still, always facing the constant motion. Thank you very much.